Long time ago, there was a king who ruled over a small Yoruba kingdom. This king was known as King Adeoye. He was a very greedy and cruel man. All he cared about was money and power. King Adeoye would force his people to work very hard in his fields and farms. The people would work long hours under the hot sun, but would get very little food or pay. The king kept all the money and crops for himself. He was making his palace grandeur and filling it with riches. But King Adeoye always wanted more, so he started raiding nearby villages and capturing people to sell as slaves. At first, it was only a few people every month, but his greed grew and he was sending raiding parties out every week to capture more and more slaves. He created a whole system of slave trade in his kingdom. Traders from afar would come and buy slaves, from which made him very rich. Soon, he had sold almost all the young, healthy men from his own kingdom as slaves. Only the old, women, and children were left to work in his fields. With all the money pouring in from the slave trade, King Adeoye started lavishing his son, Prince Adaropo, with the best of everything: fine robes, gold, jewelry, and even a stable of horses to ride. He brought in scholars from faraway lands to teach Prince Adaropo mathematics, history, and many more. While Prince Adaropo lived like royalty, the people of the kingdom suffered great poverty and hardship. Many families had lost fathers, husbands, and sons to slave raiders. Women had to struggle to take care of their families alone. There was little food to go around, but anyone who complained or spoke against the king would be immediately captured and sold off as a slave. King Adeoye continued like this for many years, seemingly untouchable in his palace full of gold while his people suffered. By the 30th year of his rule, he decided to throw a great feast in his own honor to celebrate. On the day of the feast, tables overflowed with food and wine inside the palace. Nobles and merchants who had grown rich by associating with the king came from far and near bearing gifts. Outside the palace gates, the people of the kingdom gathered too. They were drawn by the smells of roasting meat and sweet dessert. They stood round with empty stomachs watching drunken nobles go in and out of the gate. As the feast reached its peak, King Adeoye called his only son, Prince Adaropo, to come and dance before the guests. Prince Adaropo was dressed in fine white robes and gold jewelry from head to toe. With a smiling face, he performed his dance full of energy. The starving people outside the gate could only watch hopelessly, their gut growling as they saw plate after plate of meal and food being carried inside. Among the crowd outside was an old widow named Aduni. Her husband had died 5 years ago from overwork in the king's cassava farm. Then, just 1 month ago, King Adeoye's men had come and dragged away her 2 grown-up sons to sell as slaves across the sea. They were the widow's only family left and the main providers for the household. As Aduni watched Prince Adaropo dancing without care behind the castle gates, she was filled with grief and anger. She raised her hands to the sky and in a loud, cracking voice cursed the prince and the king. "You and your father have brought nothing but suffering to this land," she cried. "You feast on our sweat and blood while we starve outside your gates. May you feel the same helplessness. I curse you, and one day you will pay," the widow declared. The music and chatter inside the palace stopped as everyone heard the widow's curse, but after a moment's pause, the music and revelry continued again. Palace guards pushed Aduni back and told her to leave the premises. Then King Adeoye ordered the dancing to resume. Prince Adaropo leapt to his feet and began performing again for the guests. He twirled and leapt about rapidly as the drum beats increased in tempo. The guest and even his father laughed and cheered, coaxing him to dance faster for their amusement. Prince Adaropo smiled too as he gave in to their demands. But suddenly in mid-leap he stumbled and fell hard to the ground, unmoving. Silence fell in the hall. The king rushed from his throne down to his son, pushing people aside. When King Adeoye got there, he found, to his shock and horror, that the prince was dead. Prince Adaropo had lost his footing while dancing and had cracked his skulls open fatally on the palace stone tiles. For a moment no one dared speak or move as King Adeoye clutched his only son's lifeless body closely and began weeping bitterly. Then slowly, quietly at first, then louder and louder, the guests and nobles began whispering amongst themselves in stunned voices. Soon, accusations and whispers gave way to outright shouts calling the king wicked and heartless for bringing this fate upon their land over his greed. In no time, word spread all over the kingdom that Prince Adaropo was dead, and the widow's curse had come true. The people were in uproar, demanding justice at last for all the suffering King Adeoye had put them through. When King Adeoye emerged from the palace, the crowd outside the gates erupted in anger at the sight of him. They pelted him with stones and rubbish, screaming for him to step down as king. Stunned by their brazenness, King Adeoye fled back inside the palace. Still, the people banged on the gates for hours till the palace guards opened the door for the king to calm people down. But to the surprise of King Adeoye, the guards instead seized him and dragged him outside to the still ravenous crowd. "Wicked king," the crowd yelled at him, "your greed has brought this fate upon Prince Adaropo and this land." King Adeoye had grossly underestimated how much his people hated him because they had never showed their true feelings before the day. They had suffered brutally under his selfish rule for 30 long years. So when the elders arrived, they gave King Adeoye a choice to either step down peacefully or forcibly removed as king. Overwhelmed at seeing the entire kingdom turned against him so bitterly, King Adeoye finally conceded defeat. Stripped of his golden crown and fine robes, he was marched to the edge of the kingdom and banned from ever stepping foot there again. Disagreed and broken, the once powerful and feared ruler set off alone into exile. He was never seen or heard again in the kingdom. With King Adeoye finally gone, the elders worked to steadily heal the kingdom from all the suffering and damage he had caused over the long years of his rule. Lands and farms were redistributed more equally, so hunger eased. No more slave trade, families were reunited. Aduni, the widow who had cursed the prince and the king, lived the rest of her days peacefully under the rule of the new king. She got to see both her sons returned home from across the sea where they had been sold. So ends the tale of the King Adeoye and how the curse of one heartbroken widow brought down his wicked reign that had caused so much suffering. His son, Prince Adaropo's death, showed the gods frowned upon those who only cared for gaining power and wealth at the expense of innocent people, and the king ultimately paid a heavy price for his ruthlessness when faced with the people's wrath. In the end, the courage of an ordinary widow Aduni proved more powerful than all of King Adeoye and Prince Adaropo's combined. For she possessed something far stronger, a pureness of heart and the empathy to ease suffering in others, things a true leader should have, not boundless greed. I believe you have learnt great lessons from the story. Thanks for watching. Kindly subscribe, like, and comments. Goodbye.